Hello, and welcome to Making Brain Candies. I am just doing this as an initial test, and it looks like it is working. Fantastic. I'm going to be trying to make a relaxing brain candy today, because there is a desire for some more relaxing scenes. I am starting with a basic template, which has, I'm just going to turn the volume down on this a bit for now, so you can hear me a little bit better over the audio. So the basic template has a single cone with a, a very slow procession of rings moving inward. So this is a nice place to start. And I'm doing all of my work in Render Handler Siny, and usually the first things that I start to adjust are the frequency and the speed. I find that motion that actually goes toward the viewer is a little nicer, a little bit more comfortable, a little less vertigo-inducing in VR. These rings are quite broad. In VR, the field of view is approximately a circle centered like this. So anything that's within this circle is very easy to see without having to move your eyes around, and as it goes toward the edge, it exits your field of view. So let's see. I don't have a specific plan in mind today, so I think I'm just going to start messing around a little bit. Relaxing colors are sort of cool in terms of our symbolic relationship to these things, sky blue and ocean blue. If you actually want to try to fall asleep, reds are actually better because blue light is actually fairly activating. But we're going to go somewhere in the middle, let's say, and start with a nice purple color. So now my main color is in the purple realm, go a little softer and desaturated. And as you can see, the colors are actually interpolating from this color gradient to this color gradient too. So it's actually going from this purple to this white up here. You might also notice that I need to adjust the color of my gradient. By default, it will take the leftmost color of the gradient and use that. So I'm going to go from sort of lighter purple to somewhat more saturated, darker purple as a starting point. Now something else that I'll start to adjust is my amplitude. So the amplitude is like a multiplier, and this gives harder edges. So if I set the amplitude up to like 1,000, let's say, now I have extremely hard edges. If I set it to the default, which is an amplitude of 1 and an add of 0, now my values are going from 0 at the edge to 1 on top, and then actually these blacks are becoming negative. And I don't know if this translates over the stream, but that is actually resulting in an extra ring in the negative range. So if I clamp this at 0, now we should have a nice pure black down on the bottom there. So I'm just going to start with this. I'm going to go even a little bit slower, set it to 0.1, and I'm just going to go ahead and say this is a nice base to get going with. I think what I'm going to do next is attach an oscillator to my color. So instead of just having it be purple, I'm actually going to go from a purple to a slightly cooler purple. So it's going to be a subtle gradient, and I'm going to attach an oscillator. So to make an oscillator, I'm going to make a new empty game object, and I'm going to assign an oscillator LFO. So by default, these oscillators go from -1 to 1 over the course of 1 second. So that's where the speed comes in. If I set the speed to 0.5, now it's going from -1 to 1 over the course of half a second. So I'm going to go for a nice theta rhythm of 3 hertz. So if I set that to 0.33, we get 3 oscillations per second. And I'm going to go from 0 to 1. And for now, I'm just going to leave it as a sine wave. So if I go back to my basic template and I drop my new oscillator into here, now I have a 3 hertz strobe, which is feeling a little fast for pure relaxation. So I'm actually going to slow that down a bit. I'm just going to make it 2 hertz. Okay, not a bad start. Now to create a little bit more dynamism, I'm going to take this game object. I just renamed it color LFO. I'm going to make a second color LFO, and I'm going to plug that into my second color. So the second color is now going from this purple to white, which I don't want. I'm actually going to take that from a purple to a very dark purple. And then I'm going to slow this one down. So we're going to have oscillations that are moving at different speeds. So we have our primary color oscillating 2 times per second, and then the second color oscillating 1 time per second. So this is all being based on a material called SinyAd. We do have a number of options for different kinds of materials. I have another material I think I want to play with today called Siny No Malt. So Siny No Malt will actually transition from one color to another without multiplying the rings on top. So in the other one, I'm multiplying the color of the rings on top of my colors, and in this case, I'm just going directly from color to color. Now it does seem like it got a bit dark, so I'm just going to crank up that amplitude. So let's see, why did it get dark? I'm just going to check my opacity, check my Z vignette. Right, so there we go. So my Z vignette value was set in such a way that it was fading things out a bit too much. So to see what Z vignette is doing, I'm going to crank up the Z vignette power. And then as I move this down, the Z vignette basically creates a vignette. So if I want something that's just in the center, I can adjust it like that. In this case, I do want some vignette. I want it to sort of fade out toward the edges. So I'm going to do a little something like now my amplitude is too high. I'm going to bring it back down. So now it is going, I'm actually going to set this to 0.5, and I'm going to set my add to 0.5. So now it is going from 0 to 1. There's no negative values, so there should be no clipping of the values the way that it's set up right now. So I think this color, the intensity shift is a bit too much, so I'm actually going to take my second color and make that a bit darker to match. So now we have some reasonable strobing that I think feels nice as a base for our very relaxing scene. Now, just having rings is a bit dull, and we have some options for mixing that up. I have this razor stuff in here, but it does create hard edges. So I think I'm actually going to go for using my texture and applying some distortion. So these red and green and blue channels refer to different colors that are in this one texture. So I have a red square and a green circle, and then this blue radial pattern, which I haven't actually been using very much at all. I have been sticking pretty much toward circles and squares, which actually provide quite a lot of variety. So if I go back to my basic template, I can choose my blue color, and then I am going to simply turn up my distortion. So the distortion uses that texture. So it didn't do much, right? It just apparently increased the frequency of the rings. And that's not really what I want. I want it to distort based on the texture. And the reason I'm not seeing any distortion is that my tiling is set to nothing. So as soon as I turn up my tiling a bit, we can see a bit more of a texture. So this is tiling in one direction, and this is tiling in the other direction. So right now my rings will be moving through the texture, and the texture is sitting still. But I also want to add a little bit of motion to this underlying texture. So I'm just going to increase the speed of that. So now the speed of the oscillation is similar to the speed of the rings. And I'm just going to adjust that so the rings are moving out and the tiling texture is moving in. I think even that's like a little bit too fast. So that very slow motion will give us sort of it's moving slow enough that it's not going to create any kind of uncomfortable sense of motion. So I just want something very subtle here. Something else I'm going to do is I'm actually going to scale everything in Z. So you can't see this in this 2D view, but in 3D, it's going to have much more of a tunnel effect. And that the texture is being mapped in 3D space. So it does take into account the size of the cone. So I'm actually going to go ahead and bring down the Y tiling to make it look a little bit more similar than it to the way it did before. So I can get some more circular circles. All right. And my distortion, I think it's just a little on the high side. Just want something subtle. There we go. So just a little bit to give you some texture and some sense of space. And I'm just going to pop over and make sure that my stream is still working. All right, looks like it's still working. OBS looks like it's still working. Great. Okay, so I think I'm just going to hop right in and look at some audio settings. So I have this synth object here. So my synth object is connected to this frequency setter. Now, if I hit, I was going to hit R. So R will actually randomize things, but I need to be careful because my randomization is set up to respect my previous settings. And what I really want to do is when I randomize, I don't want to change anything right now until I have my values properly set up. So I'm going to set my ranges to current values before I randomize anything. Set frequency is set up to randomize the bass tone from 120 to 220. Let's see, maybe I'll turn this volume up a bit. Hopefully the sound of that tone is not overwhelming my voice. So now if I click in here and I hit R, so now the way that this is set up is that the speed is connected to the speed of my basic template. So if I actually go in here and I set the speed to be a bit higher, so the way that that is working is in my synth, I have two tones, and one tone is two away from this tone. So I have a 206 and a 208, and by combining those together, we get a waveform that creates a beat. So that's how a lot of the binaural beats are being generated in Brain Candy. But I don't want my main scene to be going quite so fast. So I'm just going to set that back to where it was, which is very slow. And now my tone is, it's just a little dull. Like it is fading in and out in a way that I think I want to keep, but I would also like to have the volume of my tone be connected to the volume of my colors. So I think what I'm going to do to accomplish that is take my, there are various ways, but the way that I'm going to do it right now is I'm just going to connect it directly to the volume. So I'm going to take my color LFO and I'm going to create an empty game object, and I am going to make this a remap. So this is going to be remapping the um, this oscillator, and that means remapping the low and high values. So I want to go ahead and go, I'm never going to make it totally silent, but I'm going to make it go from very quiet to a low value. The volumes in the synth uh, can be pretty low and still audible. If you have one oscillator that's at a volume of 1, it'll peak out. If you have two oscillators set to 0.5, that will peak out. So I don't want to peak right now. And I am just going to connect that remap to my volume. And I'm going to connect it to the volume of both. So we're getting, something that sounds like an isochronic beat, even though we are just directly adjusting the volume there. And this wobbling is a bit too much, so I am actually going to set that remap to be a little bit more subtle. All right, so now my synth is a little boring sounding. Just two tones is just gonna, create a pure sine wave tone, which doesn't always sound great. So I'm gonna go ahead and increase this, the number of tones to 6. And what I want to do is turn these into harmonics. So just for the moment, I'm going to turn the volume down in OBS. I can't actually hear the output right now, so I don't know how annoying that sound is. Um, but I am going to turn this down for myself right now. So I'm just going to make that 0.05, 0.01, and I'm going to adjust that later. And then what I want to do is turn each of these tones into harmonics that also have different uh, beats. So to do that, I'm going to use my set frequency node. I'm going to make 6 tones to match the 6 tones in um, in my synthesizer. So my bass frequency index is, if I set it to -1, it pays attention to itself. Anything else, it will pay attention to that tone that's set here. So all of these bass frequency indices, and well, let's see, if I scale that up, will I still be able to see it in OBS? Let's see. Yeah, so bass frequency index, bass frequency multiplier, and then what I need to do is set each of these to their respective tones. So this is going to 0, that's going to 1. I want this one to go to 2, and this one to go to 3, and this one to go to 4, and this one to go to 5. So then I don't have to worry about bass frequency or min or max, because all of the rest of them are getting those values from up here. But what I can do is play with speed multiplier and the bass frequency index multiplier. Hold on, I'm just going to pause my stream. I just got a package in the mail. So hopefully I'll see that downstairs, or maybe somebody else got a package. Um, all right. So now I'm going to adjust this tone so that my other frequencies are going to be multiples of the base frequency. So I'm going to set this to 2, and I'm going to set this to 3. And this is how harmonics work. So now these tones should sound nice when combined with that bass tone, and then typically the additional harmonics would actually get quieter as they go. So I'm going to take my remap and duplicate that a couple times and set this back up to my high value. And then I'm going to make each one a little quieter as they go up. So then I have to connect these volumes into my volume section. So I'm setting this remap here, this remap here, and then my next remap is here, and my next remap is here. So now this volume should be going between a low value in 0.05 and 0.1 and 1.5. So it definitely sounds nicer than it did. And then I want to start playing with the speed multiplier. So what I want to do is increase the frequency of the beats with these different harmonics. So now this one is going to multiply by 3. You can see that this speed multiplier, by being 1 and this one 0, this is going to give us an oscillation that matches the speed. Now these are actually matched together, so I'm going to set that to 0, and what I should be hearing is a isochronic tone that is much more frequent. So it's a bit hard to hear with that bass tone in there, so I'm just making these silent. Okay, there we go. So now it should be much more apparent how this change in frequency is creating a more frequent beat. Now the speed is so slow, I need to set this up to be quite high for that to have much of an effect. So I'm going to set that speed to there, index multiplier, and then I'll do the same thing for my final tone. So I'm just going to set these back to 0 and set that to 0.05. And I'll do the same thing down here. So my speed multiplier, let's say it's doing 36, so I'm going to do 36 times 2. So now this one's even more frequent. So kind of a nice tone now. I think I want to do, what I want to do too is this color is controlling that bright color, and it's just repeating pretty regularly. So what I actually think I want to do is create an other oscillator and connect it to that oscillator for slower frequency oscillations. So So I'm going to take this oscillator and I'm going to pop this open and I'm actually going to add this oscillator to the multiply. Oh, why didn't that work? Let's see. Oscillator? No, did I not? Oh, it's because I didn't add an oscillator. Okay, so this one I want to have go from 0 to 1, and I want that to take 10 seconds. And now I'm going to plug that into my multiply. So what should happen is that over the course of 10 seconds, that inner value should oscillate more or less over the course of 10 seconds. And it is subtle. To make that more apparent, I'm going to actually take the same oscillator and connect that to this one as well. So I'm going to have that one oscillator affect the multiplication of both of my color oscillators. So it should go from, right, so here it's not oscillating at all, and then it goes into more intense oscillations. So kind of like that, and to make more dynamism, I'm actually going to take this oscillator and I'm going to change the speed, duplicating it and changing the speed so that they're a little bit out of sync, which can create for some nice visual dynamics. All right, so now my inner color and my outer color are continuing to oscillate, but they'll be a little bit out of sync. All right. So just as a sanity check, I'm going to go back to my randomizer and I'm going to set the ranges to current values. And now if I hit randomize, one thing right now that is changing is the pitch, but I also want to play with the speed, which should change the audio as well. So right now my speed is going from negative 0.1 to negative 0.1, which I like. I'm going to make it go from negative 0.1 to negative 0.3. So it's going to stay slow, but we should hear some difference in the oscillations. And I want to play with a distort multiply. So I'm going to actually make it even lower on the low end and a little higher on the high end. All right, so now I actually want my volume to fade in and out a bit. So let's see what's going to be the best way to do that. I think what I want to do is create yet another oscillator. Let's see, what is the best way to do that? Yeah, I'm going to create another oscillator. Set that to 0 and 1. I want this to be very obvious at first. Set the speed to do. And then my color oscillator is going from 0 to 1 over 1 second, plus it has a multiplier on top of it. And for my volume, what I'm going to do is take that color oscillator and set that. I'm actually like, I'm not 100% sure if this is the right way to do it, so I'm just experimenting. So I'm plugging that into this one as a multiply. So yeah, so color goes in there. So what I want to do now is actually remap this multiplied oscillator. And I'm hoping that the end result will be a bit of a slow fade in and out. Let's see, just got to make sure that my oscillators are attached to the right thing. So we got remap 2 there, we got remap 1 here. All right. So let's see, volume should be, I'm just going to change all of these to have a low volume of 0. Okay, everything seems to be working right except for this high one. Yeah, so this one is not quite there yet. Let's see, did I map that to the right one? Oh, nope, I still need to map that to this one. Okay, good. So now I am going from no volume at all to volume. And the way that I sanity check that is I brought my trough down to less than 0, but clamped it at 0. So I just have a period of silence. But that's not really what I want. What I want to do is go from just like low value to high value over a longer period of time. All right, now it's going from pure silence to the volume that I chose over 15 seconds. And part of that is that I set these low remap values to be 0. So now I don't want to go to pure 0. I'm just going to go to 0.005. Okay, so now got a little bit more dynamism going on. If I wanted to get fancy with this, it's also nice to set the pan, and it's nice to have an oscillating panner as well. But for now, I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm actually just going to pan one tone to the left and one tone to the right for each one. So if I wanted to do the full binaural beat effect, where actually each ear hears totally different tones, I can set those to be, purely -1 and 1, and then any binaural beats will happen in your brain. But I want to maintain some isochronic tones, so I actually want the beats to be there in monaural space as well. And then I'm just going to, as a sweetening touch, add a reverb, let's say. All right, so if I look at this and I think, is this relaxing? It's getting there. I think that these colors might still be a bit intense to be relaxing. So I'm going to make some tweaks to these colors. I think I'm just going to desaturate them a bit to start. See if that might help them feel a little bit more relaxing. Maybe even make them a little bit cooler. So something I can do too is that I actually just set this volume to just be on its own speed. But I am doing this multiplication over the course of 10 seconds, so I might as well synchronize my volume with my images. So I'm just going to set that to be 10 seconds as well. So these will be doing the same thing. By doing that, the timers are going to be offset at this point. So in order to resynchronize everything, I'm just going to click this Reset All Counters button. So now all the oscillators should be synchronized, and what we should see is that when the strobing gets a little bit more intense, the volume gets a little louder too. Okay, so this is a good base for a relaxing candy. Just checking in here, the scale of this one is set to 1, 1, and 3. I'm just actually just going to go ahead and save out this template. I'm not going to call it basic template. I'm going to call this, I'm just going to name this cone. So we can call this cone base, let's say, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a new parent. And I'm going to go ahead and save this out as a prefab. So I'm doing some stuff in a different window, so sorry you can't see that, but I basically was just doing some reorganization, and I now have this relaxing O1 as a prefab, so I'm all saved, so I can go out of play mode if I want and keep working for safety. So what I want to do now is make a second layer of cone. So I'm going to take that cone base. Now it's going a bit crazy because I duplicated these cones, and the inner cone is in the exact same position as the outer cone. So what you're seeing is Z fighting, because it's geometry sitting on top of geometry. So I'm going to turn off the synth to start, and I am going to scale down this cone in X and Y. I'm going to set the sorting order. So now my inner cone is sitting on top of the outer cone. Let's see, maybe you can't hear that anymore. I think something's going on with my audio. For some reason, it stopped playing. I'm going to ignore that for now. So I'm going to go back to my Siny. I'm going to do a Siny add stereo shader. So now my inner cone is inside of my outer cone, and it will give us it'll give us some Z depth because it's smaller, which makes it seem closer. So um, this is my front layer, and I think what I want to do with my front layer is make it much less frequent. So this is going to be more of like an overall sort of color effect on top of everything. Um, and I want to do something different with the textures. So I'm actually going to make the texture much more frequent, or maybe twice as frequent, let's say 22. All right, so now we have a much finer texture to overlay on top. And then I don't just want to do this distortion to get the textural effect. I actually also want to multiply in my initial texture. So I don't want this additive effect to be too strong. Now you might notice that the color is green, and that is actually because of a little hidden trick inside of this texture pick. If W is 0, it uses the color of the texture to multiply on top, which is sometimes desirable, but more often than not, you want that multiplication to be, that mixing of the colors to be monochromatic. So if I set this to -1, it's going to be subtracting that color. And now we have a field of dots. that's going to be coming in and out of view. My speed's a bit high because it's less frequent. The speed is going to be higher. All right. So let's look at that on top of our base object. Now for this cone base sanity check, I'm just going to make sure to set my ranges to current values. So every time I hit R, the foreground should always be the same. But my background is changing. And I'm not sure why, but my audio is sort of dipping in and out. I'm going to turn on this synth just to see what happens and if it sounds nice at all. One issue here is that this synth and this synth are basically just fully randomizing two different tones. So there is no relationship between them. So sometimes it will make nice tones accidentally, and more often than not, it will probably make tones that don't sound very nice together. Um, so um, in order to connect these two, I would ideally I would go into this synth, and instead of having 6 tones here, I would have 12 tones. Um, and then I would do some different randomizing, or I wouldn't do different randomizing, I would have different relationships between these two tones. For now, I'm going to leave this as it is. I'm just going to go ahead and save out this prefab. I think I'm going to just put a pause on this. I'm going to come back to it. It's definitely not finished, but I think as a base for a relaxing experience, I think it's an all right start. So I am in my inspector. I am dragging this over to my project view, and now I have saved that as a prefab, and I can pick it back up again and continue working on it in the future. So we'll come back uh, and stream the continuation of developing this project. So I'm just going to hit stop. And boom, we're suddenly back to our original objects. But fortunately, I saved out the work that I did, and now I can go back and pick that up in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and stop streaming now, and perhaps in the next live stream, I will finish this one up. Thank you for watching my first test.